The Sylvan warship Eternal Silence hung in the darkness of space like a predator waiting for prey, and Commander Vera Kethalis stood on the observation deck watching the burning wreckage of the human vessel drift past her window. She had heard stories about humans for many years now, ever since the strange creatures from the unstable world called Earth had stumbled into galactic society. The stories said they were soft and weak, that they came from a planet so dangerous and chaotic that they should never have survived at all. And yet somehow they had crawled out of their gravity well and reached the stars. Vera found the whole thing rather amusing. Her species, the Sylvan, had ruled their sector of space for over 10,000 years, and they had conquered dozens of worlds and broken the spirits of countless species. What could one small primate species possibly offer that would concern her? The door behind her slid open with a soft hiss, and her second-in-command, Lieutenant Torek, entered with his head bowed in respect. "Commander, we have recovered a survivor from the human vessel," he said, his voice carrying the slight tremor that Vera had come to recognize as excitement. "Only one survivor from the entire crew?" she asked, turning to face him. "The ship suffered a catastrophic reactor breach, Commander, and most of the crew died in the initial explosion. This one was found in an emergency pod that had been damaged during the blast." Vera felt a smile spread across her thin lips, revealing the sharp teeth that her species was known for throughout the galaxy. "Bring the creature to Interrogation Chamber 7, she ordered, "and make sure it is properly restrained. I want to see what secrets these humans are hiding." Torek nodded and hurried away to carry out her commands. Vera took one last look at the burning debris field outside her window before making her way down to the interrogation level of the ship. She had broken many prisoners in her long career, and she expected this human to be no different from all the others. The corridors of the Eternal Silence were cold and dark, lit only by the soft blue glow of bioluminescent panels that lined the wall. Sylvan ships were designed to be uncomfortable for other species, to remind prisoners and visitors alike that they were in hostile territory. By the time Vera reached Interrogation Chamber 7, her guards had already secured the human in the central restraint chair. She paused outside the door and studied the creature through the observation window. The human was male, according to the information her scanners had gathered, and he appeared to be in his middle years by their species standards. His skin was a light brown color, covered in various scars that suggested a life of violence and conflict. But what caught Vera's attention most was his leg. The human's right leg was bent at an unnatural angle, clearly broken in multiple places, and dark blood had soaked through the torn fabric of his uniform. The injury looked extremely painful, the kind of wound that would have most species screaming for mercy. And yet the human sat perfectly still in the restraint chair, his eyes closed and his breathing slow and steady. Vera felt the first small flicker of unease in her chest, but she pushed it aside and entered the chamber. The human's eyes opened as she approached, and Vera found herself stopping mid-step as those strange round eyes fixed upon her face. They were a dark brown color, almost black in the dim lighting of the chamber, and they held an expression that Vera had never seen in a prisoner before. There was no fear in those eyes, no desperation or panic or pleading for mercy. Instead, the human looked at her with a calm and steady gaze that seemed to be measuring her worth and finding her somewhat lacking. "I am Commander Vera Kethalis of the Sylvan Dominion," she announced, forcing her voice to remain steady and strong. "And you are now my prisoner." The human said nothing in response. He simply continued to watch her with those dark, calculating eyes, as if he was waiting for something important to happen. Vera circled around the restraint chair, studying her prisoner from every angle and noting the details of his physical form. Humans were smaller than Sylvan on average, standing only about 2/3 of her own height, and their bodies lacked the natural armor plating that protected her vital organs. They had no claws or fangs or venom glands. No natural weapons of any kind that she could see by all accounts. They should have been easy prey for any predator species in the galaxy, and yet the reports from the frontier had been troubling human. Colonies had been expanding at an alarming rate, and every attempt to slow their growth had ended in unexpected failure. 3 Sylvan patrol ships had gone missing near human space in the past year alone, and no trace of them had ever been found. "What is your name and rank?" Vera demanded, stopping directly in front of the human and leaning down until her face was only inches from his. The human met her gaze without flinching, and when he spoke, his voice was rough but completely steady. "Lieutenant Marcus Cole, Terran Defense Force, serial number 7-7-4-2-9-81. Vera waited for him to continue, to offer more information or to beg for his life. But the human fell silent again and simply continued to watch her. "You will tell me everything about your mission," she said, letting a hint of threat creep into her voice. "Or you will suffer greatly." Marcus Cole tilted his head slightly to one side, as if considering her words very carefully. "I already gave you my name, rank, and serial number," he said. "And that is all I am required to provide under the Galactic Convention on Treatment of Prisoners." Vera felt a flash of anger at his calm defiance, and she reached out with one clawed hand to grip his broken leg. The human's jaw tightened and his hands clenched on the arms of the restraint chair. But he made no sound at all, not a whimper, not a groan, not even a sharp intake of breath. Vera squeezed harder, feeling the broken bones shift beneath her grip. And still the human remained silent. She released him and stepped back, genuinely confused by what she had just witnessed. "How is this possible?" she asked, more to herself than to him. "Your species is supposed to feel pain more intensely than almost any other in the galaxy." Marcus Cole looked down at his ruined leg for a moment before meeting her eyes again. "We do feel pain," he said quietly. "And right now I am feeling more pain than you can possibly imagine." He paused, and something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "We just do not let it control us." Vera stared at him for a long moment, trying to understand what kind of creature could endure such agony without showing any sign of weakness. She had tortured members of species far stronger and more fearsome than humans, and all of them had eventually broken under her methods. But looking into the calm, dark eyes of Lieutenant Marcus Cole, she felt something she had not experienced in many years. She felt doubt. "Take him to a holding cell," she ordered her guards, her voice sharper than she intended, "and post extra security. I want someone watching him at all times." As the guards moved to release the restraints and drag the human away, Marcus Cole turned his head and spoke one last time. "Commander," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the chamber, "you have made a very serious mistake today." Vera felt a chill run down her spine, but she forced herself to stand tall and proud as her prisoner was taken away. He was just a human, she told herself, just a weak and fragile creature from a primitive death world. How much trouble could one injured prisoner possibly cause? She would learn the answer to that question very soon, and she would wish with all her heart that she had never asked it. 3 days passed on the eternal silence, and Commander Vera Kefalis grew more frustrated with each passing hour. The human prisoner had been subjected to every interrogation technique the Sylvan had developed over 10,000 years of conquest, and none of them had produced any useful results. The neural probes, which could shatter the mind of most species within minutes, seemed to slide off his consciousness like water running off smooth stone. The pain amplifiers, which could make a single touch feel like burning fire, only caused him to grit his teeth and stare at his torturers with those dark, unblinking eyes. The sensory deprivation chamber, which had driven members of stronger species completely mad, seemed to have no effect on him at all. When the guards pulled him out after 12 hours of complete darkness and silence, he simply blinked at the light and asked if they were done yet. Vera had reviewed the recordings of each session multiple times, searching for some sign of weakness that her interrogators might have missed. She found nothing. The human endured everything they did to him with the same calm, steady patience, as if he was simply waiting for a storm to pass in the morning of the fourth day. She decided to conduct the interrogation herself. The guards brought Marcus Cole to Chamber 7 once again, and Vera noted that his condition had gotten worse since their first meeting. His broken leg had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, and dark purple bruises covered most of his visible skin. The wound on his leg had become infected, and she could smell the sickness coming from his body, even from across the room. And yet he still sat upright in the restraint chair, his eyes clear and focused despite the fever that must have been burning through his system. "Your body is dying," Vera said as she circled around him slowly. "And I can smell the infection spreading through your blood." Marcus said nothing, but his eyes followed her movements with careful attention. "Without medical treatment, you will be dead within 2 days, maybe less," she continued, stopping in front of him and crossing her arms over her chest. "Is whatever information you are protecting really worth your life?" The human considered her question for a moment before responding. "Yes," he said simply. "It is." Vera leaned closer, letting her sharp teeth show in what she hoped was an intimidating display. "What could possibly be so important that you would choose to die in agony rather than share it with me?" Marcus met her gaze without flinching, and when he spoke, his voice was hoarse but steady. "Everything," he said. "My people, my home, my family, my friends. Every human being who is counting on me to keep my mouth shut." He paused and took a shallow breath, clearly fighting against the pain that must have been flooding through his body. "You want to know about human defenses, about our fleet positions and weapon systems, about the locations of our colonies and the routes our supply ships use." Vera felt a spark of excitement at his words, hoping that he was finally ready to break. "Yes," she said eagerly. "Tell me everything, and I will have my doctors save your life." But Marcus shook his head slowly, a small sad smile appearing on his cracked lips. "If I tell you those things, you will use that information to attack my people, and many humans will die because of my weakness." He looked directly into her eyes, and Vera was shocked to see no fear there at all, only a deep and unshakable resolve. "I would rather die 1,000 times than let that happen." Vera stepped back, genuinely confused by his response. She had encountered loyalty before, of course, but it was usually a fragile thing that crumbled quickly under enough pressure. Most prisoners would betray their own families to make the pain stop, their own children even, once the interrogation became severe enough. But this human seemed to genuinely value the lives of strangers more than his own survival. And she could not understand why. "Your species confuses me," she admitted, dropping her usual commanding tone and speaking more honestly than she had intended. "You are weak and fragile, with no natural weapons or defenses. And yet you refuse to submit even when submission is the only logical choice." Marcus laughed at her words, a rough, painful sound that turned into a coughing fit when he recovered. He looked at her with something that might have been pity. "You think you understand humans because you have read some reports and captured one injured soldier," he said. "But you do not understand us at all." He shifted in the restraint chair, wincing as the movement jarred his broken leg. "Let me tell you something about my species, Commander. Something that your reports probably did not include." Vera found herself leaning in closer, genuinely curious about what he would say. "Humans evolved on a death world," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger despite his obvious pain. "A planet where everything wanted to kill us, from the weather to the wildlife to the microscopic organisms living in our own bodies." He paused and looked around the interrogation chamber, taking in the tools of torture that lined the walls. We learned very early that the only way to survive was to endure. To keep going no matter how much it hurt, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. His eyes returned to Vera's face, and she was startled by the intensity she saw burning there. Your species conquered other worlds, because you were stronger and better armed. And when you met resistance, you simply crushed it with overwhelming force. Marcus shook his head slowly. Humans are different. We conquered our world not through strength, but through stubbornness. Through the absolute refusal to give up even when giving up was the smart thing to do. He gestured at his ruined body with his chin. Since his hands were still locked in the restraints, you have broken my leg and infected my blood and tortured me for 3 days straight. And you think this is supposed to make me surrender? A genuine smile crossed his face, transforming his features despite the bruises and dried blood. Commander, this is nothing compared to what my ancestors survived. Nothing compared to the famines and plagues and wars that shaped my species into what we are today. He leaned forward as far as the restraints would allow. His eyes locked onto hers. We feel pain more acutely than almost any other species in the galaxy. That part of your intelligence was correct, and every nerve in my body is screaming at me right now. His smile widened, and Vera felt a chill run through her body. But we have had thousands of years of practice at ignoring that voice, at pushing through the pain and the fear and the despair, at doing what needs to be done no matter the cost. Marcus settled back in the chair, his brief burst of energy apparently exhausted. So go ahead and keep torturing me if that makes you feel better, he said quietly. But I want you to know something very important. Vera waited, her heart beating faster than it should have been. I am not trapped in here with you, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. You are trapped in here with me, and sooner or later, you are going to learn exactly what that means. The words hung in the air between them, and Vera found that she could not think of any response. She turned and walked out of the interrogation chamber without another word, her mind racing with thoughts she did not want to examine too closely behind her. Lieutenant Marcus Cole sat alone in the darkness, his broken body slowly failing, but his spirit completely unbroken and somewhere in the depths of his fever-addled mind. He was counting the guards and memorizing the patrol schedules and planning his next move, because humans never stopped fighting. Not even when fighting was impossible, not even when every logical calculation said they should surrender. That was what made them so dangerous. And Commander Vera Cathalis was only just beginning to understand it. On the 5th day, Commander Vera Cathalis made a decision that would change everything. She had spent the night reviewing classified files about humanity, searching for any weakness she might have overlooked. And what she found had only made her more frustrated. The humans had been in contact with galactic civilization for less than 50 years. Barely a heartbeat in the long history of the cosmos. And yet they had already established dozens of colonies across 3 star systems. Their technology was crude compared to the Sylvan, their ships slower and their weapons weaker. But somehow they kept winning battles they should have lost 3 years ago. The Sylvan battle group had attacked the human mining colony on the edge of their territory, expecting an easy victory against the primitive defenders. The colony had been protected by a single outdated defense platform and a handful of civilian militia with basic weapons. The battle should have lasted less than an hour instead. It had dragged on for 3 weeks, with the humans using every trick and tactic imaginable to slow the Sylvan advance. They had collapsed tunnels on top of attacking soldiers, poisoned water supplies, set traps in every corridor and room, and fought with a ferocity that shocked the veteran Sylvan warriors. By the time the colony finally fell, the Sylvan had lost 4 times as many soldiers as the humans had started with, and the survivors had destroyed all useful equipment and data before allowing themselves to be captured, denying the Sylvan any valuable intelligence. closed the file and rubbed her eyes with her clawed hands. She needed to break this prisoner. Needed to show her crew that humans were not as dangerous as the rumors suggested. Her reputation depended on it, and more importantly, so did the morale of her entire ship. She made her way down to the holding cells where Marcus Cole was being kept. And she brought something special with her. The Keth blade was an ancient weapon, passed down through her family for over 2,000 years. Forged from crystallized sylvan bone steel in the traditional manner, it was said to be unbreakable, capable of cutting through starship armor as easily as soft flesh. And it had never failed to intimidate even the bravest prisoners. The guards outside the cell snapped to attention as she approached, and she could see the relief in their eyes. They had been watching the human for days now, and his calm, patient silence had unnerved them more than any amount of screaming would have. Vera entered the cell and found Marcus Cole sitting on the floor with his back against the wall. His broken legs stretched out in front of him. His condition had deteriorated significantly since their last meeting. His skin had taken on a grayish color, and sweat covered his face despite the cold temperature of the cell. The infection was clearly winning the battle against his immune system, and she doubted he would survive another day without medical treatment. But his eyes were still clear and alert, and they tracked her movements as she approached. "I have grown tired of waiting for you to see reason," Vera announced, drawing the Keth blade from its sheath and letting the dim light gleam along its crystalline edge. Marcus looked at the weapon with mild interest, but showed no sign of fear. "That is a nice sword," he said, his voice weak but steady. "Is it supposed to scare me?" Vera felt anger flare in her chest, hot and bright, and she found herself moving. Before she had consciously decided to act, she swung the Keth blade down toward his injured leg, aiming for the thickest part of his thigh where the swelling was worst. She expected him to scream, expected the blade to slice through flesh and bone like a hot knife through butter, expected to finally see the fear and desperation she had been waiting for. What happened instead would haunt her nightmares for the rest of her life. The blade struck his leg with a sharp, ringing sound, like metal hitting stone, and then it shattered. Crystalline fragments exploded outward in all directions, scattering across the floor of the cell like broken glass. Vera stumbled backward, staring in disbelief at the hilt in her hand where a moment ago there had been a blade that could cut through starship armor. She looked at the human's leg, expecting to see devastation, expecting to see blood and torn flesh and exposed bone. Instead, she saw a thin line of silver beneath his torn skin, barely visible through the infected wound. Reflecting the dim light of the cell, Marcus looked down at his leg with an expression of mild curiosity, as if examining a minor scratch rather than an injury that should have crippled him. Then he looked up at Vera, and the smile that spread across his face was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. "Subcutaneous titanium mesh," he said calmly, as if explaining something to a slow student. "Standard issue for all Terran Special Forces operatives." He tapped his thigh with one finger, and Vera heard a soft metallic sound. The mesh is woven directly into the bone structure during recovery from serious injuries, creating a lattice that is stronger than any natural material in the galaxy. Marcus shifted his weight, wincing slightly but still maintaining that horrible smile. "You see, this is not the first time someone has broken my leg, and the Terran military likes to make sure that kind of thing does not happen twice." Vera's mind was racing, trying to process what she had just witnessed. Her Keth blade had been in her family for 2,000 years, had survived countless battles and killed hundreds of enemies. And this human's leg had shattered it like it was made of cheap glass. "How is this possible?" she whispered, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to control it. "Your intelligence on humans is about 40 years out of date," Marcus said, his tone almost friendly, like he was sharing interesting gossip rather than revealing secrets. "A lot has changed since we first made contact with the galaxy. He leaned his head back against the wall, and Vera noticed that his breathing had become slightly easier, as if sharing this information had given him new strength. When we realized that the galaxy was full of species that wanted to conquer us or kill us or enslave us, we started making changes, big changes, to make sure that would never happen. Marcus held up his hand and flexed his fingers, and Vera saw the same silver glint beneath the skin of his wrist. Every bone in my body has been reinforced with titanium mesh. Every major organ protected by synthetic shielding. Every muscle fiber enhanced with carbon nanotube weaving. He looked directly at her, and his eyes seemed to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with fever. I'm not the same kind of human your species encountered 50 years ago, Commander, and neither is any other member of the Terran Defense Force. Vara took another step backward, her back hitting the wall of the cell, and she realized that she was afraid, truly afraid, in a way she had not been since she was a child. "Where are you?" she asked, a voice barely above a whisper. Marcus considered the question for a moment before answering. "I am what humans become when we have to survive," he said simply. "I am the product of 10,000 years of evolution on a death world, combined with 50 years of desperate technological advancement against a hostile galaxy." He gestured at his broken, infected, dying body with a weak wave of his hand. "This flesh is failing, Commander, and I will probably be dead within a day if you do not give me medical treatment. But you need to understand something very important." His voice dropped to a soft, dangerous whisper. "Even dying, even broken and sick and chained in a cell, I am more dangerous than anything you have ever faced before." He closed his eyes and let his head fall back against the wall. "And there are billions more just like me, waiting out there among the stars, and all of them are wondering what happened to me." Vora fled the cell, her shattered blade forgotten on the floor, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, and for the first time in her long career, she began to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. "Commander Vera." Cathalis locked herself in her private quarters and began searching through every classified database she could access. The shattered remains of her family blades still lay on the floor of the human cell, and she could not bring herself to go back and retrieve them. Her hands were shaking as she entered her security codes, and she had to try 3 times before she got them right. The Galactic Union maintained extensive files on every known species, and Vera had read the basic reports on humanity many times before, but those were public files, available to any member of the Union, and they contained only general information about human biology, culture, and technology. There were other files, however, files that were restricted to high-ranking military officers and government officials. Files that her predecessors had marked as classified for reasons that were becoming terrifyingly clear. She found what she was looking for buried deep in the intelligence archives, hidden behind 3 layers of security encryption. The file was labeled simply Terran Threat Assessment, Eyes Only, and it had been updated just 6 months ago. Vera opened it and began to read, and with each passing paragraph, her horror grew. The first section detailed human biology, but not the simple overview she had seen before. This version talked about things that made her scales crawl with revulsion and fear. Humans were persistent predators, the file explained, evolved to chase their prey for hours or even days until the target collapsed from exhaustion. Their bodies could heal from injuries that would kill most other species, regenerating bone and tissue with remarkable speed. They could survive in temperature ranges that would freeze or boil the members of most galactic races, and they could adapt to new environments within a single generation. But that was just the beginning. The file went on to describe the modifications that humans had made to themselves since joining galactic civilization. The titanium mesh reinforcement that Marcus had mentioned was just one of dozens of enhancement programs that the Terran military had developed. There were neural implants that allowed soldiers to communicate silently and share sensory data in real time. There were genetic modifications that increased muscle density, bone strength, and immune system efficiency. There were nanotechnology treatments that could heal wounds in minutes instead of weeks, that could filter toxins from the blood, that could even restart a stopped heart. The humans were turning themselves into something new, something that was no longer quite human in the traditional sense. And they were doing it at a pace that left the other galactic species struggling to keep up. Vera scrolled down to the next section, which was titled Combat Effectiveness Analysis, and what she read there made her want to vomit. A single enhanced human soldier, according to the assessment, was considered equivalent to approximately 15 standard Sylvan warriors in direct combat in urban environments, where humans could use their natural talents for ambush and guerrilla warfare. That ratio increased to nearly 50-1, but the most disturbing part was the section on human psychology. The file described something called combat persistence, which was the human ability to continue fighting even when defeat was certain, even when their bodies were damaged beyond repair, even when every logical calculation said they should surrender. Humans did not calculate odds the same way other species did. The report explained where a Sylvan warrior might retreat when the probability of victory dropped below 30%. A human soldier would continue fighting even with odds of less than 1%, and sometimes, impossibly, they won. The file included dozens of examples, each one more disturbing than the last. There was the human pilot who had crashed her fighter into an enemy warship's bridge rather than be captured, killing herself and the entire enemy command staff. There was the human squad that had held a bridge against 200 attackers for 6 hours, losing every member but buying enough time for civilian evacuation. There was the human mech who had dragged 3 wounded soldiers to safety while bleeding from 7 different bullet wounds, refusing to stop until all of them were safe. Vera closed that section and moved on to the final part of the file, which was simply titled Recommendations. The words she found there chilled her to the bone. Do not engage Terran military forces unless absolutely necessary. The recommendation stated their willingness to accept casualties that would break any other species makes them extremely dangerous opponents. Do not attempt to capture Terran soldiers for interrogation, it continued. Their training includes extensive resistance techniques, and their psychological makeup makes traditional interrogation methods ineffective. Do not underestimate Terran capabilities based on their apparent physical weakness, the file warned. Their enhancement programs have made them significantly more dangerous than their appearance suggests. The final paragraph was the worst of all. If you have captured a Terran soldier, release them immediately and withdraw from the area, it read. Terran forces have demonstrated a willingness to expend disproportionate resources to recover their personnel, and they do not forget or forgive attacks on their people. Under no circumstances should you harm a captured Terran, the file concluded. The consequences of such actions have historically been severe and far-reaching. Vara sat back in her chair, her mind spinning with the implications of what she had just read. She had captured a human soldier, subjected him to 5 days of torture, and denied him medical treatment for a life-threatening injury, according to the file she had just read. She had made possibly the worst decision of her entire career. A soft chime from her communication console interrupted her thoughts, and she accepted the incoming message with a trembling hand. It was Lieutenant Torek, and his face was pale with fear. Commander, our long-range sensors have detected a Terran warship entering the system, he reported, his voice shaking. It is a battlecruiser, one of their largest classes, and it is heading directly toward us. Vera felt her heart stop for a moment before it resumed beating at twice its normal speed. How long until they reach us? She asked. At their current speed, approximately 4 hours, Tarek replied. But Commander, there is something else. He paused. and Vera could see genuine terror in his eyes. The ship has been broadcasting a message on all frequencies since it entered the system, repeating it over and over again. What does it say? Vera asked. Although some part of her already knew the answer, Rex swallowed hard before responding. It says, "We know you have him, and we are coming to get him, and if he is harmed in any way, you will learn exactly what humanity is capable of." The message ended, and Vera sat alone in the darkness of her quarters. Listening to her own terrified heartbeat, she thought about the human in the cell below, dying slowly from an infection that her doctors could easily cure. And she wondered if she still had time to fix her mistake. Then she thought about the battlecruiser racing toward her, carrying hundreds or perhaps thousands of enhanced human soldiers who knew exactly what she had done, and she realized, with horrible certainty, that it was already too late. The crew of the Eternal Silence prepared for battle as the Terran battlecruiser Unyielding closed the distance between them. Commander Vera ordered all hands to combat stations. Weapons charged, shields raised, and every defensive system brought online. But deep down, she knew it would not be enough. The Unyielding was nearly 3 times the size of her vessel, carrying enough firepower to reduce the Eternal Silence to scattered atoms in a matter of minutes. Her only hope was that the humans would want to negotiate, would accept the return of their soldier in exchange for letting her ship go free. She had already ordered her medical team to treat Marcus Cole's injuries, hoping that showing some mercy might soften whatever judgment was coming. It was a desperate move, and she knew it. But she had no other options left. What she did not know was that Marcus Cole had other plans 6 hours earlier. While Vera was reading classified files and learning the truth about humanity, Marcus had been working on his escape. The fever from his infection had broken some time during the previous night, which should have been impossible given the severity of his condition. But Marcus had a few enhancements that the Sylvan files did not mention, including a secondary immune system made of medical nanobots that had been fighting the infection from the moment it started. He had pretended to be weaker than he actually was, letting his body go limp and his breathing grow shallow whenever the guards checked on him. They had grown careless after watching him slowly die for 5 days. And that carelessness was exactly what he had been waiting for when the guard shift changed and only one Sylvan remained outside his cell. Marcus made his move. He had been watching the guards enter their access codes for days, memorizing the patterns of their finger movements. And he had finally cracked the sequence using a piece of metal he had pried from his restraints. He had short-circuited the lock on his cell door and slipped out into the corridor. The toady guard never heard him coming. Marcus was not strong enough to fight at full capacity, not with his legs still barely holding together despite the titanium mesh. But he did not need strength for what came next. He needed patience, stealth, and a willingness to do whatever was necessary. Over the next several hours, he moved through the ship like a ghost, using maintenance tunnels and ventilation shafts to avoid detection. He disabled security systems one by one, carefully and methodically, making sure that no alarms were triggered. He vented 3 compartments into space, killing a dozen Sylvan crew members who never even knew they were in danger. He sabotaged the ship's communication array, preventing Vera from calling for reinforcements. He planted explosive charges in strategic locations, ready to be triggered at his command. And when he finally reached the bridge, he did not bother with stealth anymore. The door exploded inward, and Marcus Cole limped through the smoking wreckage with a stolen Sylvan weapon in each hand. He was covered in blood, both his own and that of the guards he had encountered along the way, and his broken leg dragged behind him with every step. But his eyes were clear and his hands were steady, and the smile on his face was the most terrifying thing any of the bridge crew had ever seen. Vera turned from her command console and found herself staring down the barrel of her own sidearm. How is this possible? She whispered, the same words she had spoken when her blade shattered against his leg. Marcus gestured for her guards to drop their weapons, and they obeyed without hesitation. I told you before. Commander, he said, his voice rough but strong. You do not understand humans at all. He limped closer, keeping the weapon trained on her head. And Vera noticed that his leg was healing, even as she watched. The swelling had gone down. The color was returning to normal. And the wound that had been infected just hours ago now looked like it was weeks into recovery. Your doctors did good work, Marcus admitted. But most of the healing happened before they even touched me. The nanobots just needed a little more time to finish the job. He gestured for Vera to kneel, and she found herself obeying without thinking. 23 of your soldiers are dead, Marcus continued, his tone almost casual, like he was discussing the weather. And I am sorry about that, I truly am, because not all of them deserve to die. He looked down at her, and Vera saw no hatred in his eyes. No rage or desire for revenge. She saw only a cold professional calculation that was somehow more terrifying than any emotion could have been. But you made a choice when you captured me, he said quietly. And choices have consequences. The main view screen flickered, and suddenly the image of the approaching battlecruiser filled the display. The unyielding was close now, less than 10 minutes away, and Vera could see the weapon ports opening along its hull. I am going to let you live, Marcus said, because I want you to deliver a message to the Sylvan Dominion. He leaned down until his face was only inches from hers, just as she had done to him in the interrogation chamber 5 days ago. Tell them that we are not the weak primitive species they think we are, he whispered. Tell them that we have been preparing for war since the moment we first looked up at the stars. His voice dropped even lower, until Vera could barely hear him over the pounding of her own heart. And tell them that we are not trapped in this galaxy with them. They are trapped in here with us. The airlock at the back of the bridge cycled open, and Terran Marines began pouring onto the ship. They were enormous, even larger than Marcus, covered in powered armor that made them look like machines rather than living creatures. They secured the bridge in seconds, moving with a speed and precision that left the Sylvan crew frozen in shock. Marcus handed his weapons to the nearest Marine and turned to look at the command throne where Vera had ruled her ship for so many years. Without a word, he limped over to it and sat down, stretching his injured leg out in front of him. With a satisfied groan, one of the Marines approached him and saluted. Lieutenant Cole, we've been looking for you for 6 days, the Marine said, her voice tinged with relief. Command was starting to worry. Marcus laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that echoed through the conquered bridge. I appreciate the concern, Sergeant, but I had everything under control. He reached over to a small cabinet near the throne and pulled out a bottle of Sylvan wine, the same vintage that Vera had been saving for a special occasion. He poured himself a glass and raised it in a mock toast to his former captors. Took you long enough, he said with a grin. The Marines laughed, and Vera watched in stunned disbelief as the human who should have died in her cell drank her wine and sat on her throne like he owned the ship, which she supposed he now did, as the Terran forces secured the vessel and began processing prisoners. Marcus Cole sat and watched with a satisfied smile. He had been captured, tortured, and left to die. And he had turned it all into a victory, because that was what humans did. They endured. They adapted. They overcame. And they never, ever gave up. And somewhere out among the stars, billions more just like him were watching, waiting, and preparing for whatever came next. The galaxy would learn to fear them in time, or it would learn to respect them. Either way, humanity was here to stay.